Hello there, second graders. There's my silly voice for today. I've got some more Wayside for us. This one's chapter 11. What's the point? And look closely at that little picture. So I'm really excited to read these chapters because I have not read this book, number 4 of Wayside. So all these chapters are new and exciting for me too. In some classrooms, teachers choose the weekly spelling words. Not so in Mrs. Jules's class. She lets her students pick. Nearly everyone had a hand raised. Mrs. Jules called on Rondi. Pistachios, said Rondi. This is why other teachers don't let their students choose the words. Mrs. Jules couldn't spell pistachios. So she did what every teacher everywhere does in such situations. That's an excellent word, Rondi. Would you like to come up and write it on the board? Rondi came to the front of the room. Mrs. Jules paid close attention as Rondi wrote pistachios on the blackboard. I love pistachios, said Kathy when Rondi returned to her seat. Me too, said Allison. They're my third favorite nut. Mrs. Jules called on DJ. Grumple, he said. I don't think grumple is a word, Mrs. Jules pointed out. So, asked DJ, we should still know how to spell it. It might become a word someday, Kathy agreed. Mrs. Jules wrote grumple under pistachios. Joy raised her hand. A, she suggested. A what? Asked Mrs. Jules. Just A, said Joy. Don't you think that's a little too easy? Said Mrs. Jules. It's a very common word, said Kathy. It's important we all know how to spell it. Mrs. Jules couldn't argue with that. She added A to the list. Myron had his hand raised. Yes, Myron, said Mrs. Jules. What's the point? Myron asked. That's 3 words, said Mrs. Jules. And all good ones, too, chirped Kathy. The cloud of doom is getting bigger every day, Myron exclaimed. What does it matter if we can spell? So we can read and write, Mrs. Jules replied. What's the point of reading? Asked Leslie. What's the point of writing? Asked Jason. What's the point of arithmetic? Asked Benjamin. There is no point, Myron grumbled. He slammed his pencil down hard on his desk. The point broke off of it. I understand you're scared and upset, Mrs. Jules said, but what's the point of quitting? We can all just sit around and grumble, or we can try to do our best, cloud or no cloud. And it hasn't been all that bad, Mrs. Jules continued. We've been getting a whole lot more nail clippings. That was true. Ever since the cloud of doom appeared, everyone's fingernails and toenails had been growing a lot faster. They had to be clipped 3 or 4 times a week. The number on the board was now 19,457. Someday the cloud of doom will be gone, said Mrs. Jules, and the world will be a much better place, even better than before the cloud. Colors will be more colorful, music will be more musical, even Miss Mush's food will taste good. The bigger the storm, the brighter the rainbow. At that moment, a crack of thunder shook the classroom, and then the lights went out. The children screamed. They weren't scared. They just liked to scream in the dark. Mrs. Jules lit a candle, and everyone settled down. Now, shall we continue with our spelling? Jenny raised her hand and suggested hope. Excellent word, said Mrs. Jules. She held her candle in one hand and the chalk in the other. She said the letters out loud as she wrote them on the blackboard. H-O-P-E. Did you notice how grumple became a word in this chapter?